And so I would spend my weekends with my father at the union hall, right?
Mhm.
Because Saturdays and Sundays when they're not working, they are at the union hall having union breakfast, having union picnic,
Yeah.
having union meetings, talking about what's coming next. We're coming up at the end of our contract cycle. What are we asking for next contract? What can we do, even in the sense that someone within the union has lost a family member? How can we, start the meal train? How can we,
Yeah, support
who's
them.
going to show up to and be a part of the funeral and really be a part of that person's community. And I will say I have very fond memories of just being on the picket line as a 6 and 7 year old on a
Yeah.
strike with a picket sign and just being in that space with these folks who are in a lot of ways overlooked in society in some
Mm.
ways because they are on the line building your car. You might not think about them, but they put the tire on your car, right? They built your struts and have put your entire car together, but they are often not thought about in the pop culture lexicon of work experiences, although very common here in the Metro Detroit area.
That's right.
Actually, yeah. So
That's
it's
right.
interesting. And as a kid, I definitely recall being not enthusiastic about us spending my Saturdays with my dad in the union hall, sitting around eating, going to the union breakfasts. But as I've progressed through my life and social justice has front and center of who I am and what I do, I reflect back on those are the first sort of equity conversations I remember hearing and being a part of, right?
Mhm.
Those are the first times I remember hearing words like equal pay and paternity leave and maternity leave. Um, and how do we advocate for higher pay? And now that I'm older, I just recognize how much of a privilege that is. It was to be able to um, hear those things, learn from those conversations, and see a sort of collectivist care or collectivist community in action, right?
Mhm.
And see folks really care about one another and wanting all of us, everyone in the union to do well and wanting us all to make more money, us all to have better health care and to take care of one another in a way that is really authentic. And I just I'm really grateful for that. The thing that's beautiful is it was definitely a space at the time that I was like, I don't want to. Do we have to go?
Yeah, do we have to go? Yeah. Mhm.
Do we have to go to this? We were just there 2 Saturdays ago.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
But now I'm like, wow, that's how I learned what equity was and how power systems work and how corporations work and how do you sort of work both in cooperation and in opposition for the betterment of the whole.
This is Social Justice Origin Stories. I'm your host, Rolando Tompkins Jones. Social Justice Origin Stories is a storytelling project that highlights personal stories and defining moments that have inspired individuals and organizations to labor for equity and social justice. Through truth telling, the honest sharing of their experiences, storytellers teach us about themselves, enabling us to learn about ourselves and our world through their stories. By reconnecting with pivotal moments of activation in their lives, they invite us to do the same. At Social Justice Origin Stories, we believe that there's power in storytelling and lived experience is experience. There's room enough for all of us to do this work. There are many ways to contribute, and our contributions don't need to be the same. We can enter and remain engaged in the work using the gifts that are special to us while supporting others and using theirs. We have the capacity to grow and change for the better when exposed to new information and experiences. We believe in our inherent worth and capabilities, and we possess the power to inspire and create change within ourselves and others. We can transcend the confines of the status quo to imagine and design more equitable and humanizing systems. Today, we're joined by Courtney Holland. Courtney and I go back a number of years from when I was working as a director of social justice education in the higher ed space. And it's been my honor to follow and track your progression a
Yeah.
little bit throughout the years. And I appreciate when I sent out the call to you. that you considered it and also that you joined in and wanted to share your story. So thank you so much for being with us today.
It's Courtney Holland. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I am an educator by trade. So my master's is in education, but I have been and am, I would say, everywhere all at once. It's very interesting. DEI work is not unlike some professions where it's you are in this track and you are in this space, this very like industry. DEI is lucky enough that we are everywhere all at once, at least ideally. I've been in the higher education space. Currently, I work in health equity for a hospital system. And I've also been in between in corporate consulting and all of that jazz too in various different industries. But DEI has always been my heart and my sort of center of the work of wanting to create, educate, make space for people to thrive in just their lives, to
Mhm.
just be able to exist in a way and work and home in the education space that is natural and nuanced and authentic to themselves. So I would say that is my work in a multitude of different spaces.
Well, thank you for being here and sharing aspects of that work with us. So, as you're reflecting on your own social justice origin stories, you've woven three separate but connected stories together that supported your entryway into really valuing and working for social justice. One of which starts with some of your time at the Union Hall with your father.
Yes, yes. So I and Rolando, I think you as well, grew up in Detroit, in the
That's
metro
right.
Detroit area.
That's right.
Yeah, and so just about everyone's family has a family member or works for the big 3 auto companies, so Ford, GM, and Chrysler, and my dad is none the same my entire life. He worked and for one of the big 3 and was a member of the UAW or the United Auto Workers Union. And so for folks who don't have context into the sort of union space, they are a collective body of folks who are auto workers. And actually, the UAW is nationwide. And so there are like teachers who are a part of it, and they all contribute money to collectively bargain for higher wages, for better labor practice. Just overall, they've found as a collective that it is more effective for them to collectively bargain with these companies, however, uh, or whatever organization they work for the betterment of the entire group, if you will. It's very common for these folks to attend what is called the union halls. There are different locals, like Local 107, which is just like a smaller body of this entire collective. And like a lot of parents, literally because my parents were divorced. And so I would spend my weekends with my father at the union hall, right?
Mhm.
Because Saturdays and Sundays when they're not working, they are at the union hall having union breakfast, having union picnic,
Yeah.
having union meetings, talking about what's coming next. We're coming up at the end of our contract cycle. What are we asking for next contract? What can we do, even in the sense that someone within the union has lost a family member? How can we, start the meal train? How can we,
Yeah, support them.
who's going to show up to and be a part of the funeral and really be a part of that person's community. And I will say I have very fond memories of just being on the picket line as a 6 and 7-year-old on a
Yeah.
strike with a picket sign and just being in that space with these folks who are in a lot of ways overlooked in society in some
Eh,
ways because they are on the line building your car. You might not think about them, but they put the tire on your car, right? They built your struts and have put your entire car together, but they are often not thought about in the pop culture lexicon of work experiences, although very common here in the Metro Detroit area.
that's right.
Actually, yeah. So
That's
it's
right.
interesting. And as a kid, I definitely recall being not enthusiastic about us spending my Saturdays with my dad in the union hall, sitting around eating, going to the union breakfasts. But as I've progressed through my life and social justice has front and center of who I am and what I do, I reflect back on those are the first sort of equity conversations I remember hearing and being a part of, right?
Mhm.
Those are the first times I remember hearing words like equal pay and paternity leave and maternity leave. Um, and how do we advocate for higher pay? And now that I'm older, I just recognize how much of a privilege that is. It was to be able to um, hear those things, learn from those conversations, and see a sort of collectivist care or collectivist community in action, right?
Mhm.
And see folks really care about one another and wanting all of us, everyone in the union to do well and wanting us all to make more money, us all to have better health care and to take care of one another in a way that is really authentic. And I just am really grateful for that. I think, and the thing that's beautiful is it was definitely a space at the time that I was like, I don't want to. Do we have to go?
Yeah, do we have to go? Yeah.
Do
Mhm.
we have to go to this? We were just there 2 Saturdays ago.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
But no, I'm like, wow, that's how I learned what equity was and how power systems work and how corporations work and how do you sort of work both in cooperation and in opposition for the betterment of the whole. And so
Ooh,
I
now
just, yeah.
I'm gonna have to ask you about that. I'm gonna have to ask you about that. An hour later, how you wanna do it? I was like, "Oh, say a little bit." Yeah, just say a little bit more about that. Working in cooperation and opposition. I thought this was really significant when you shared that.
Yes, and yeah, and I think it's the narrative of DEI in whole is that we recognize that these, especially someone who's worked in corporate consulting, right? That these organizations are interested in equity only in so much, right? Like they're
Yep.
only something as it is economically valuable to them in some ways.
Mhm.
And the beautiful thing about the unions is, and if folks don't know this, when union members go on strike, it is because there's an offer on the table for pay, healthcare, all of those things for the next contract. And the folks within the union decide that's not good enough and we are going to walk off the job. And
Mhm.
you continue as you're on strike, your union leads continue to have these dialogues, these conversations, negotiations with the representatives at the organization to sort of come to some sort of understanding. I would say this is some of my first like dialogue thought process too. Now that I think about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but it is you are both simultaneously trying to cooperate to come to some sort of deal so folks can get back to work because union members, they do get paid when they're on strike, but it is not a lot. I believe it's like 80. It depends on the amount, but it's very small compared to how much it is not their salaries by
That's
any
right.
means.
That's
It's
right.
enough to maybe buy groceries. If you remember the Hollywood strike a few months ago, maybe a year ago now,
Yeah.
and folks were
Yeah.
like, we're not getting paid. We only get $100 a week or something like that. It's the same difference for auto workers, right? And so you're working both with the company and the union to try to come to some sort of agreement and work in collaboration. But also, you're trying to resist this sort of corporate offer that is usually not great. It's sometimes it might be good, but it's we can always do better, right? Like
Yeah.
we can all because the corporation's always going to try to protect their profit margin. And so then we're like, we're trying to protect our people and everything is going up but our paychecks. So
Mhm.
let's where can we meet in the middle? And it's very sort of beautiful to think about how folks are working and advocating to no, we're not gonna just we know our power, what our
Yeah.
power is, and the longer we stay on strike, we're not making money.
Yeah.
But we're also not making money. But I want to name that they are also not making. Um, but it is. this sort of collective knowing of power and negotiating that and also resisting the urge to give in just to have some sort of court coming in.
Yeah.
It's powerful to have been a part of and to watch as folks continue this work. Because I believe they were just on strike maybe 2. My father's gone on now, but I still keep track of what's going on. And I believe they're on strike last summer as well.
Hmm.
Not to as large of a scale, but a few of the plants walked off. And so it is amazing to see the work continuing and the tactic still works, right?
Yeah.
The tactic is still working.
Yeah, it's still working, and I really appreciate the way you're supporting listeners, particularly listeners who may not be familiar with how unions operate and the things behind the scenes on what the life, the struggle, the dynamics are there. And you said, okay, so working it's like I appreciate those distinctions you made between working with the system, but then working outside of it as well is really important. And oh, that last part too around we're not getting paid either. And it made me think about just like the sacrifices that they're making with the idea of in resisting that real need, sometimes that real desire to
Mhm,
say yes, just to have something. So just thinking
mhm,
about when folks are at that point where they're striking, there's lots of decisions, lots of considerations they've made, and it's no, these conditions are not enough for us to get a benefit, right? Mutual benefit. We trade our time and our labor and you profit from that. And we should also be taken care of as well. So I appreciate you naming and explaining some of those dynamics. Okay, so I used to go just listen to you share. So, oh, do we have to go back? Do we have to go back? But then hearing you reflect about it now, and it sounds as if it was this really good, like early training ground for understanding equity and injustice and how to work against that, how to work for equity. Um,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I do. I think it was a really I wouldn't have said it then, but I think it was a really great training ground. And I think my dad wouldn't have named it as that either, as a training
Right.
ground or educational opportunity. We gotta go. It's Saturday. We gotta go to union breakfast or whatever. My dad was like not a talker and very much a kind of stoic guy. But I think it really imparted on me this lesson of the betterment of the whole and the collective. Um, and that educational opportunity to
Hmm.
be a part of that. And I am just I think it's interesting because he was not into my sort of social justice
Hmm.
pivot in career at
Hmm.
all. He was like, "You have a biology degree. You're gonna do what now? You were supposed to go to medical school.
Hmm.
You were supposed to go to medical school, man. What do you mean you want to do this social justice thing?" And
Yeah.
so now
Yeah. Yeah.
I do, but sometimes I want to be like, all of these sort of reflections have come post his transition, but I think it's so interesting now to be like, "Dad, you're a key piece of this, man.
That's right. That's right. That's
You're
right.
s you're a part of the pivot."
That's right. You taught me a lot of this. I'm doing a lot of the things that I learned through being with you and
Mhm.
spending time at the uni hall. Hmm.
Exactly, exactly. Now I wanna be like, "Yeah, now the pivot, you inspired this."
Hmm. That's right. That's right. That's right. And as I'm listening to you share too, I'm just thinking about, and again, these are things, and I'm hearing you say it too, and these are things that sometimes when we're that age, we don't always reflect on it or get the gravity of what's happening and what kind of a contribution it is until years later. But I'm also just thinking, wow, and you got this kind of insight at such an early age. As I'm listening to you, I'm just like, oh, you got this at
Mhm,
such an early age. But of course, young, you're not seeing it that way. But yeah, just seeing you being here now, I'm just as a listener, I'm having some appreciation for that and you sharing that story. And then
mhm.
and then as you continue to move forward, you mentioned another pivotal piece being your intro to African American studies when you were in college.
Yeah, yeah. So, for context for folks, I grew up in Detroit. However, I never went to like the Detroit public school system. So my parents always, my sort of entire sort of educational K-12 experience was in the suburbs. So my
Okay.
parents would drive, which is in retrospect now as someone who goes to work every day, mind you, I don't have children. And so there is, I know like a level of nuance to that. But my parents would wake up extra early, drive me and my brother like out to Roseville, Clinton Township, and then go to work
And then go to
every
work.
day
Yeah.
and go to work every day, which is just one, I'm really grateful because I think in a lot of ways, and I say this, I had a really great education. I had a really good education. I got I did well on the ACT. I had lots of educational opportunity. I went to college.
That's right.
I
That's
went
right.
to
That's right.
college. I went to college and did all of these things. However, I think what that sort of breeds is one, a sort of cultural disconnect in some ways. A lot of times I was one of the very few Black people in the space. And then also comes a lack of showing up because there aren't Black and brown, there aren't many. I think I have one Black teacher in high school. And I specifically took his elective so that I should have him.
Yep. Just to be in the
So
space. Yes. I understand that.
so I took his elective junior just so I could be in his class. Comes a curriculum that isn't necessarily like reflective of my cultural experience
Hmm.
besides slavery.
Right.
And I know that's not funny, but also truly, it is
Yeah.
honestly astonishing that I remember very distinctly. You spend 6 weeks on the Civil War in history class, but really you're just memorizing the battles and you don't really talk about or the key players of what's happening, but you don't really talk about that there are enslaved people there, what their names are. After that, Black people don't show up again in the history curriculum until the Civil Rights Movement.
That's
So
right.
what were they doing in that 100 there? And so you're telling me there weren't any Black and brown people in that 100 years in between 1865
Where do we go?
and who knows? Okay, so yes, all of that sort of in context. I distinctly remember I was like, I'm going to take Intro to African American Studies. This is going to be a breeze, right? I'm Black. This class is about Black people.
Ooh-wee.
The confidence on 19-year-old Courtney is astounding. It's so
Yeah.
many. I was like, where was your mind at? But yeah, I was like, oh, this is going to be a breeze. It was not.
Mm.
And it was right deep, a good sort of educational experience for me in a lot of ways, because I remember the first day of class, the professor was like, tell us what is a culturally relevant education? Tell me what a culturally relevant education is. And I remember being like,
What do you
what
mean?
is this?
What are you saying?
What does that mean?
Yeah.
And he does the sort of teacher song and dance of like, all right, put it together. What does it mean? And then we're looking at the experience, taking either sort of racial experience, gender, whatever, putting it at the forefront of of the lens of which we view the material, right? And I remember being like, huh, what is that? Okay. Okay. And so in this context, we are talking about the lens of race, African American Studies class. And he was like, so we're going to go back through 1619 ish going forward, where it comes from, some of the racial theories along the way. And during this time, he is naming people left and right, right? Like
Yeah.
he is dropping Sally Hemings, he is dropping and Audrey Lorde, all these names. And I'm like, who is this?
I never heard about them when I was learning about this in school. I've never heard their names before. Yeah, yeah.
What I tell you, and this is 100% the truth. I can't do it now, but at the time, I could name all of the US presidents in order. First, but I could not name more than sort of 10 Black history figures. And I was one just awestruck. We're here. We're a part of not even just US history, but as a collective history. And these contributions. And also there are words for the things that I have experienced. There's microaggressions, there's sexism, misogyny, all of these words. So, and I've experienced, and when you're like, whoa. So when Sarah was touching my hair and talking about, oh, this is wool, Like, there was a
Mm.
word for that.
Yeah. Yeah.
There was a word for that when insert whatever. I played basketball in high school, and of course I'm tall, and so they're like, "Of course you play basketball." Like all of these sort of like cultural sort of digs that you
Yeah.
experience as a black and brown person, especially when you are sort of white normative spaces. You're just like, okay, there are words for these things. People have talked about this experience, and in a way, and while at the union hall and even in my family, like we talk about these things about, oh, you're black, you're going to experience these sort of hardships. But as a first generation college student and all those things, that the language, words to call those things, those frameworks, I didn't know. I didn't. And I remember one, the sort of light bulb coming on. And simultaneously, I was really mad. I was really angry.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, at my good education, right? I was like, "What's good? I didn't learn any of these things. I didn't talk about any of this. And this is what is important to my ancestry's experience and my sort of life journey, right? And we've never had an thoughtful conversation about that or looked at it this way. And it really, what I would call one, ignited this sort of like thirst for social justice knowledge. Because now I have all the books. So, and I know all the things. And my nephew he's about to be 2. And I only bought him, I only bought social black history books when he
Yep.
was 4. I was like, no, we're not reading Mary Had a Little Lamb. That's not,
Yep.
and Courtney's not buying that. Okay.
Yep. You are part of his social justice origin story too. Hey. Yeah.
Mhm. Oh no, we're gonna know who Phyllis Wheatley is. We're not about to be out here just knowing all this mumbo. We gotta know culturally relevant education.
That's
Okay.
right.
And yeah, I got angry and it was what at the time it was I was in college from 2013 to 2017. So very much the word at the time was woke. I think I took woke. I got a little, I would say, I got a little deep. I think we all of us who have had this social justice journey, we do have a time where we just are like, it's a lot,
Yep.
right? It's a lot. You're like everything is like a little no Black history fact. There were few dive deep. You could in my Facebook, you could definitely find some like
Yep.
social justice sort of rants in there that you're just like, we get it.
We get it.
And we get and as, an educator, I see that as a part of my developmental process in
That's
this
right.
space, right? Okay, you're going through the steps, means to be socially aware, socially conscious, to learn this process. And it's interesting now working, I don't work day to day with young people now, but I did for a long time seeing them in their process and recognizing
Yeah. Yeah.
what's happening, it's a beautiful thing to see, and you don't want to placate them, but you recognize what's going on, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
when I worked at a college and university and just seeing young activists be born and them
Yeah.
going through this process of whether it was a gender studies class or an LGBTQ studies class or whatever class or TikTok at this point, because I think TikTok University is real too and
Yeah.
offers a real sort of perspective
I
just to
agree.
see them also go through this like everything is a prison and I want to burn it all down and everything is,
Mm.
and watch them go through this like wave until they find, I think we all find where our happy medium is. These are the things I can change. These are the things I can't. But you
Yep.
got to go through that sort of wave first. But I think that sort of awakening experience is obviously instrumental to everything that I do. Right now, I work in the health equity space and I pull out the new Jim Crow often, or there are several other sort of like Black healthcare nuanced books that I bring up in work all the time because
Yeah.
I know that they exist now and I
Yeah.
can do the work. and offer that cultural lens to folks because for those who have not had that sort of lens introduced to them or that educational space, it is honestly astonishing. It is honestly sort of one astonishing to hear some of the conversations of, and then also recognize that our education system failed these folks and that they don't know these things are happening. And so I remember during COVID, one of the big sort of nuances that was coming up was that Black and brown folks were dying exponentially more than our white counterparts. And folks were like, why is that? Why is that? And I was like, okay, well, they're like, that doesn't make sense. It's just like insert X, Y, Z. And I was like, no, pause. Let's
Pause.
put on our let's put on our culturally relevant lenses right now. Let's think while we're up here just making full leaps, because that is full leaps of just this is why. And I have no data on this, but this assertion is just what I think. You can just like culturally relevant. Let's here. Let's think about food deserts. Let's think about how the living spaces for Black and brown folks within this country, the access to healthcare,
Come on,
all of
public
those.
health. Come on
I'm
now.
just
Social determinant. Come on.
yeah. And folks are like, oh, I didn't think about it that way. And so I keep saying that I'm grateful, but I'm really grateful for the intro to African American studies because it in a joking way, my villain origin so
Hey. Yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right, teaching me the words, and then it was like, okay, this is what we're doing. This is my life now. This is my career, man. I got stuff to teach people. People need to know that.
Yeah. Y'all been lied to the same way I've been lied to. Everybody needs to know this.
Yeah, and I know you are also on the social media, the social justice social media streets. It's really interesting to get in these comment
It is.
sections and to see people just not know history. And I don't fault them, right? I think that is also a part of you start to get this sort of critical, sort of global perspective. And I'm like, it is not your fault that you don't know this piece of history.
Right.
So that it is simultaneously, okay, I am aware now that this is, although my culture, culturally relevant, all of those things, no one got that education, right? No one got to learn the real nuances of the Underground Railroad other than Harriet Tubman, right? And
Yeah.
that, because I think literally just think the Underground Railroad was just Harriet Tubman, and that she was the only figure that existed and fed this sort of very complex and nuanced system to move enslaved folks, right? They're just like, oh, Harriet Tubman found that, or the A Birth of a Nation and the sort of rise of the KKK and how this film inspired this generation
Yep.
of Jim Crow. Right. So it's
Yep.
if you aren't taught these things or seek this information out, the K-12 system is truly failing folks in that way. It definitely gives it. I definitely have empathy, and I try not to go ham in the comments, but I will just be like, you should read this book.
Yeah, yeah. Have you tried this? Have you considered this? Because I appreciate you describing when you were describing the experience, it's okay, there's this awakening, and then it's okay, I want to know more. Everybody needs to know this. As I think of you, I'm just thinking of my own entryway into that and coming into some of that knowledge. And along with that, for me, there was also this, I think you described it too, this anger, right? There's also this anger, right? There was a time and place where I just wasn't having any of it. Like I was so fed up.
No,
I was so fed up. It's no,
absolutely
this
not.
is a lie. I was all these quotes from pulling these quotes from Lincoln and President Johnson and all these folks. Thomas Jefferson is y'all favorites, y'all heroes were not the people y'all thought they were. And so
Mhm.
to the point now where I will go back on these college reunions and stuff, and I'll run into people, old classmates, and they were like, they say stuff like, "Rolando, oh, I remember when you told that one student, like you just let them know in class, like you just shut it down." All these experiences, I'm like, and some of them I don't even remember, but I'm like, wow, y'all remember? Like there was a point in time that there was the anger that came with that awakening and awareness. And I was all about it. I was all about it. I wasn't every conversation, I was there. And so when you talked about also having the experience of working, being on college campuses and seeing the young activists and seeing where they are in their development, is yeah, I'm remembering those days. And I'm remembering like seeing that too. I remember for me the James Baldwin quote, to be a Negro in this country and to be relatively conscious is to be in the state of rage all the time. And later on in the quote was like, and the work is to channel that rage in a way that it doesn't consume us kind of thing. For me, that was
Mhm.
education. And I liked how you said, okay, you see, you get to this kind of happy medium of like, all right, here's what I can control. And I just felt like you described that your process, and I think you described like the overall it just really, it was very vivid, took me back to my own experiences as well. So I'm hoping
Mhm.
folks who are out there listening are traveling along with us as we're sharing. But yeah, there was that
Mhm.
period too where it was like, and
Only somebody let
every
somebody say something, just a
yes,
little something. You'll be like, "Hold up. Do you know if I tell you something, okay? Insert X, Y, and Z quote here." Or and you're like, dude, just and it's even just like learning the delivery because these things still happen, right? As
yeah,
someone who
yeah,
works
it's
in
still
social
true,
justice,
but yeah,
true, but you're like, now I don't know. There's the anger definitely still exists. I would agree. But I am just more maybe nuanced about also because I do it for work. It's like my job. I can't just be out here like
hmm,
just telling people how I feel.
yeah,
There was this sort of anger of, and I could see like harshness. Like I recall sometimes being harsh about how the delivery of it was. And the sort of reflection that I have now is that although the person, one, likely probably wasn't intentionally causing harm somehow,
hmm,
and two, was not that anger was not necessarily towards them. That it was just like a blanketed sort of anger of this is the system that now that I'm awake to this system that exists that is working all the time that I didn't know that I fed into in
hmm,
some ways. I am angry largely, and you just happen to
yep.
you're gonna deal with the consequences.
You're right in front of me. Hey, I'm angry right
Mhm,
now, and you're in front of me. Hey, you're gonna hear what I gotta say. For me, and so that getting to that happy medium for you, what was it that kind of helped? These are things that I can control, things that kind of open up your scope a little bit. Like for me, one of the things I'll say, like my undergrad was primarily getting grounded in the ways I was lied to in terms of my racial identity, some gender identity things, and a little bit of ability, I'll say as well. In terms of my superiority in those latter two areas, the messages around male privilege and able bodiedness and that kind of thing. But for me, it was going to grad school, learning more about actually intergroup dialogue facilitation, getting deeper into intersectionality, being in dialogues with people, and sometimes saying things just my own lived experience and somebody else like that same anger that I would have at another person for not understanding about something about my racial identity and lived experience. Somebody else would recognize, hey, but something that I had just said spoke to my lack of awareness around male privilege or gender identity, heterosexual privilege, and those sorts of things. And so having those experiences and oh, for me, it was humbling. It opened up my awareness of, yeah, this rage is legitimate. And also, oh, wait a minute, there are some things that I need to know too. So I want to say it mellowed me out a little bit. Like you said, the anger is still there, but it mellowed me out a
mhm,
little bit where I, I think you even mentioned empathy, where I have a little bit more. I'm
mhm,
able to see myself in some ways as an oppressor as well, and so trying to undo some of that. So, what were some of the things that helped you to get to that, as you were describing it, like that happy medium? This is what I can control. That kind of opened it up. I also remember hearing you saying, "Oh, wait, like none of us got this education." Like coming to that, so entering into it from that place and
mhm.
recognizing the larger influences that led to what you're experiencing.
I believe everyone needs a therapist. I think there's something beautiful about having someone in your life, and I'm lucky my therapist currently is a Black woman, and so she is very familiar with my sort of experience, or at least some nuances of my experience, right?
Hmm.
But I think it is very useful to have someone in your life who is impartial, right? I have no I know her name, And I think I know she has a daughter. But other than that, there is no sort of just no sort of stakes in any sort of things other in my life other than her being my therapist, right? Having someone in your life who can tell you the truth and know that there's no because no one, even your parents, are gonna sugarcoat it to some degree because they love you or whatever. But having someone, and I appreciate she's very blunt. She'll be like, "That's the story that you're telling yourself, but is that the truth?"
Mhm.
And having someone reflect the things that you are saying and putting out there back to you is a beautiful thing and it helps you grow. And so I thought I started my therapy journey in college
Yeah.
because I think for a number of I had to do a lot of internalized racism, sexism things that were going on, a lot sort of anxieties and things that started to show up and affect my day-to-day life. Um, one having that sort of space, and I'm very privileged to have that sort of space, to have someone, to have a regular therapist so I could talk to be like, these are my emotions. I'm angry about insert X, Y, and Z thing and this thing, and having someone be like, let's see it from this person. Have you looked at yes, listen,
Mhm.
can all these things be true?
Mhm. Mhm.
Can the comment be harmful? Could the person not have the intentions of the comment being harmful? And also, could it be true that they also didn't have this educational experience? And did they deserve you to go off on this sort of ancestral anger? Have this ancestral anger thrown at them?
Mhm.
And that how I have started to even hear that in my own. At first, you just need that person to give you that feedback. But now as I've gotten older and my brain has fully developed and all of those things, I can have that conversation with myself and be like, is that the story I'm telling or is that the truth? Like where and trying to rationalize it with yourself. What is the sort of I'm angry about this, yes, but also these other factors are true too. And so then you're finding the nuanced sort of reaction in there. I would agree with you as well that dialogue also helps. I think intergroup dialogue, and being trained as a facilitator helps because one, you learn to do some of the things that actually you learn in therapy, right? To
Yeah.
reflect other people's thoughts back to them, reflect their body language, reflect their language back to them, especially because in some ways as a facilitator, you are the leader of this space. It helps you learn, okay, I can't off about this thing because then everybody's gonna I'm
Mhm.
responsible for this 12 group of people. I said we were gonna have a vulnerable conversation. I can't be up here talking about being like saying you said this. And so that definitely helps as well learn the sort of cognitive ability to mellow out that anger.
Mhm.
And then I think also a privilege. I studied abroad in undergrad my senior year. I went to South Africa for 6 weeks. And going, one, you unlearn a lot of things when
Yeah.
you go to a different country. But two, think you I had a real sort of narrative within me that African Americans are like utterly oppressed. We are, and when you put that in a global context, we are oppressed. But however, if you put this into the global context, particularly in certain nations on the continent of Africa, we sit in a lot of privilege in a lot of ways, right? We experienced our sort of civil rights revolutionary moment 50s, 60s, 70s. We've had like 50 years come to this narrative. And when you think about a country like South Africa, whose constitution is only about 20, 30 years old. So you all have not like as far as long as this process in some other nations, it's this integrative sort of experience. And then when you put global economics and other factors on top of that, you're like, oh, yes, I do experience oppression. I do. And there is definitely intersections and layers that you have to put in perspective. And that perspective has influenced me a lot. And now I travel a ton more. And I still feel that way, that we definitely exist within an oppressive system on so many levels. And there's a nuance of recognizing that we also sit in a place of privilege in a lot of ways as well. And so with that in mind, I also often, and especially someone who works from home 3 days a week, and then I have a very nice office that I sit in when I go to the office, that there is you have a self-awareness that you have to have. And like, even though this is frustrating, and it's frustrating and it makes me angry, and someone said insert thing here, or they're going forward with this policy that you've said 5 times is oppressive in this way. You're like, but in the grand scheme of things, we are really making strides in a lot of areas. And I hold that in contention with these other feelings. And it informs how I see the world, right? And recognizing, okay, this policy is not great. I don't love it, but also we got adopted families 6 weeks of family leave as opposed to 12.
Mhm.
And is that a win is a win? Am I super happy? No. But
Right.
in the grand scheme, right, we are of sort of a global perspective. Some people are grateful for a day or two doing that, and then they gotta
Mhm.
go back to work. And not saying that
Right.
that's right. That's the
Right.
thing that I want everyone to have the space that they need to thrive in this world. But in a US context, there's nuance. And to hold that nuance in perspective has really helped me balance out this sort of like, how do I navigate my feelings, my agenda as someone who works in this space, and what is possible, what's not possible, and what to be like, okay, this is a win for that.
Yeah. Yeah. In context, when you with the increased awareness and capacity and scope that you have is in context, yes. And you said that in a way it affirmed multiple realities. It's not to say that this thing is not important. There are these things we still don't have more to move. And in the context and the scheme of things, the greater context, we have moved forward in ways that are significant. So just acknowledging that. Yeah, that was very important. Who are some of the people or events or experiences or resources, who or what has shaped your analysis and actions in the work that you do?
We've already talked about my father. So
That's right.
we've already talked about my experience with him and going to the Union Hall. And he would be like, no, because he was not the kind of guy that would take credit for something like that, but he was. And I think that, one, I want folks to take away that it is often people. So my dad he got his GED in the army, and that's as far as he went, as far as education goes. But I've learned so much from him, from his sister, my Aunt Helen, who has a 10th grade education. Um, and same with my uncle. So I want to name a lot of the other people will say are like very well educated, very well decorated people, got a million bajillion letters after their name. But those three at the core taught me are like my core people. They taught me so much, and they might not have had the language to say microaggression or discrimination or pay equity or any of those things, but they are definitely, when I think about my inspirations and how hard I work and
Mhm.
balance and all of those things, they are the center of that. Other people who are really my people, I think about my supervisor during my internship, and who turned out to be my supervisor in my first job post-graduate school, Dr. Bernie Hernandez Rodriguez. They are now the vice chancellor of race, equity, and inclusion at UW-Madison. But when I met them, yes,
Yeah, let's go.
but when I met them, they were the director of DEI at University of Minnesota Housing. I was their intern for the summer. And I think about often the conversations that we had during that 10-week process. I saw what it really meant and how to navigate being a DEI professional in such a sort of corporate space. A lot of DEI professionals, Fernie was the
Hmm.
only DEI person and was meant to be the DEI voice for an entire department. You
Opposite
know,
one, but
opposite one.
solve all our challenges. Yeah.
I remember Fernie was so grateful to just have an intern. They were like, you can help pick some of this because it is, and I have been in this space a many a time now, and I know Rolando, you have too,
Oh
where
yeah.
you're the office of one, and then
Hmm.
you're at the table with all the people, and then you have to be the person who's always like in opposition, right? Because
Yep.
in partial, I think being in opposition in some ways is the role of the DEI professional to be like, have you seen X, Y, and Z? But
Absolutely.
then it's like you're always that person, right? Like you're in the emotional labor that it takes to
Mhm.
always be that person and to always have to be like, folks, are we thinking about pronouns are not on this form? And I said pronouns need to be on this form 16 times. Like
Yeah.
every form needs to have pronouns on it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we've
Yeah.
taught, right? And so Bernie was a great model of what that looks like and how to navigate that space. And for any of themselves will say, I definitely messed some things up. And if I were to reflect that, there's some nuances of things I probably would have politically navigated differently. And I think we all have had that in the
Yeah.
workspace, be like, in retrospect, probably shouldn't have said that. But Um, think about that both as my time as their intern and then working for them full time, just watching them navigate the space. And even in the instances that I didn't agree with what the sort of move was, it's very helpful to be like, okay, and I see that. And I'm going, if I were in this space, I would have navigated that differently. And it's useful to have that because I think a lot of, and I know this to be true because the CEO at my former company, that the DEI space is still, although existing in some ways, it's still very new. And a lot of
Mhm.
folks don't have that sort or haven't had that sort of mentorship to be like, this is how you navigate this. This is gonna come up. And how do you they at least that first generation of DEI
Yeah.
professionals are just being like, free willing it. There's no textbook for DEI professionals. I want to, maybe that's our idea. Maybe, I don't know. I don't really want to write a textbook, but somebody write a DEI professional textbook. I'd buy it. I think I just watching other professionals navigate and see and learn, I think it's been very helpful for me. Other folks who I found inspiring, my intro to African American Studies professor, Dr. Rick Stevenson, as we've talked about, that educational experience was monumental in my trajectory as a person, as a professional. And so I reflect often about that class and the things that I've learned and how I interrogate the world. I think there is a sort of critical sort of mind eye of how I think about how my brain even thinks now.
Hmm.
Um, that I can't turn off, ironically.
Yeah. Can't turn it off. Can't turn it off.
Once you like learn to think critically, you can't turn it off.
I had a professor who would say something like, once you learn how to read or something like you can't, or once you, that pattern recognition takes place, you can't look at a collection of letters and not try to make sense of them, or you can't see a collection of experiences or just patterns in your environment and not make sense of what's happening. So it's once you get that, and that's why I appreciate you taking us through some of your early the things that got you grounded and prepared to do what you're doing today. Is once you get that, I like how you said that too. You can't turn it off. It's a skill that you have. Of course, we continue to develop, but yeah, you can't come into space. Like for me, multi-partiality and learning about, in consulting, like there are dominant narratives that are out there in every room, in every space. And to the degree that we can thinking about some of the things that we do that maintain those narratives, or are we doing things that like interrupt those narratives? Like it's a large concept, but very foundational for me. It's like now every space I'm in, I'm like, all right, from an individual level, from policies that are created, from different practices, how we're defining family, like what narratives does this kind of thing reinforce, and what narratives does it, what counter narratives or other ways of lived experience, who's not being acknowledged here that we could acknowledge through opening up this process more. So I appreciate how you said that. And it's true. Can't always turn it off. So all of the people and experiences that you've named that were influential to you, what would you say to or about them in terms of gratitude or thanks or understanding the depth of their impact on your journey?
I would say that one, I would impart just ultimate gratitude, right? That who I am as like a being, as a person who exists, not even if we're not talking about the professional, we're not talking about consultant, all those things, but just me as a human being is influenced and has been changed by their existence, their being, their teachings. And I am just like the utmost grateful, right? The just in awe because I don't know. I think if those folks didn't exist or I didn't have those experiences, I wouldn't be here. I don't know where I would be, but I would like to think I would have found social justice work in some way because I think my sort of superpowers lie in the sort of people work and empowering others, but it would not be this manifestation of Courtney would not exist. And I like this manifestation of Courtney.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So I would say, great. I would say just thank you, and continue to pour into people and to do this work. I think as we don't always ask for this sort of mentee mentor role, especially, and we know as BIPOC folks or if any person with a marginalized identity, you end up doing more service work and more mentor work than you were
Yeah.
like anticipating.
Yeah. Folks
And
find you.
they find you.
Mm-hmm.
They find you.
They
And
find you.
I see it as a part of my work, but it is different to have someone pour into you and to take the time to really teach you something, give you a book and be like, read this and think about this and have this inform you or to give genuine feedback. And so I would say continue to do that, even though it could be frustrating and the person might not receive or want to. I think me and the Union Hall might not want to receive that education at the moment,
Mm-hmm.
but it comes, the life in the universe is very funny in that it comes back.
Yeah.
It comes back around and yeah, it's not high paid work, but it is very important in that people, and you and I were talking about this earlier, as we went through this sort of world journey,
Sure did. Sure
that
did.
you need people to give you that feedback. So it's like,
Mm-hmm.
calm down and to nuance that and to give you that education. And that's for, yes, for the folks that I mentioned, but also that's for anybody,
Oh
right?
yeah.
So if there's someone who really could use you or seeking you or you have knowledge that it could be useful and do it. And also recognize, I want to say that and say that we I can understand that BIPOC folks are like literally we end up with like all because there's just so few
So
in
few.
in so many spaces that it ends up being a little bit overwhelming and a lot. And in our profession, we are not underwhelmingly underpaid to do that for them.
Mm-hmm.
And so that means colleges, universities, all professions, mentorship should be a part. Put it in the position descriptions so that people are paid for the work that they do. Just saying. Okay.
That's right. That's right.
And I No, especially in higher ed. It's sort of like an expectation that higher ed professionals have this sort of mentorship relationship with students. But we're like, it's never written anywhere. And so it's not like we're evaluated on that.
No, it's never written anywhere. As you said, folks are rarely compensated for that work. And in addition to that, I know I've experienced this. I know I'm sure you have too. Not only the students or the folks who find us, they find us for mentorship. They also find us and we are supporting them with and through things that are in many ways outside of that academic scope too. Like we talking about some serious issues and
Yeah.
things that they need support with, and we are there helping them navigate that. You talked about the education you receive, but then also that hidden curriculum that they are not
Mhm.
getting and finding that from us. And in addition to the toll that it already takes, I appreciate the PSA or the call out to institutions.
Mhm.
I need to do better by us in this way, because all of that is also doing those things in addition to all the work that we already have to do, the deliverables or responsibilities that we already have to hold, that
Mhm.
honestly our white colleagues and counterparts don't have to think about that kind of stuff. And even thinking about tenure for folks who are in the faculty spaces, even that work not being seen as something that could support that too in some context. Yeah, I appreciate
Exactly.
that shout out. I need to
Exactly.
hear that.
Yes. Pay people for what they do. And I think coming from this sort of union perspective, this collectivist ideology, even if I don't get paid for it, but I still do it.
What would you hope listeners will learn or take away from your story? And what actions would you encourage them to take?
For those folks who in your life who have poured into you and created this sort of person that, and it doesn't have to be I named all of my sort of DEI social justice folks, but there are plenty of other folks in a non DEI lens, but giving them their flowers, so to speak, while you have the opportunity, because this work is lonely and it's
Yeah.
hard, and you need to know that it's helpful to somebody, right? That what you're doing is impacting someone in a meaningful way. And as someone on the receiving end, right, we know that the folks are not always going to be here. And so
Mhm.
also letting them know while they're here so that they can receive that gratitude and that love in a way that they can share the space with you. I think that is important. So if you've got a mentor, a sister friend, a cousin, or whoever, right? And don't just say, I'm just so grateful. Yeah, you can say, I'm just so grateful. But also, you literally changed my perspective on something.
Yeah.
You
Fill
literally
in the
gave me,
details.
yeah, fill in the detail.
Yeah.
You really gave me language that I didn't have before. And I am grateful for that. Is, I think, something that one, they would love to hear. And then two, that is also, as a very empathetic person, I think it is a good thing to share and to share that sort of space with people. So
Mhm.
that's one. Two, we talked about the educational curriculum in my space, right? Of thinking about what, not seeing myself in the K-12 system and then finally seeing myself and seeing my family, my history in college and that sort of awakening and all of those things. And history, books, language. I'm a reader, so I recognize that everyone doesn't read books, but and that's not their ministry. I understand that books are not everyone's ministry. I get it. But I think there is a beautiful thing in taking a course or two or reading a book or watching a movie or whatever, one in your sort of lineage, right? But then also in an alternative sort of space, right? And seeing that perspective and how that sort of culturally relevant sort of education adds a nuance and a lens to the way you view things.
Mhm.
Um, can really nuance you and grow you as a person. And I would empower folks in the DEI space. I know this to be true. We stay in race a lot. We put race, especially in the US context, we put race at the forefront of a lot of
Mhm.
DEI conversation. Our country was built on racist practices and a system on race. And also just continue to nuance DEI work and to push us forward. We need to be very intentional about educating ourselves in the queer space, in ability. Ableism is so under talked about. It is, and I will name that I am by no means the end all be all of health, equity, and accessibility and ableism and all those things. I am very much in my journey in that space, but it is astounding that 1 in 5 people either is disabled or will have a disability at some point in their life. And we don't talk about it. Then it is this nuanced thing. It's watch a documentary, read a book, as to go on TikTok.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah.
or I'm a millennial, so go on Instagram. But whatever your
Whatever you use. Yeah.
whatever you use, I'll just type it in and see what the people are talking about.
Hmm.
Honestly, because we have to continue to push the conversation and it's necessary. The last thing I would say is for us to continue to reflect, especially those of us in the DEI space who work for institutions or corporations, or I worked in consulting for a while who works for institutions and corporations. How we sort of balance that pushing and pulling that we talked about earlier when we were talking about the union space of how do we balance negotiating social justice values, ethics, policies, and working with spaces that we know are oppressive.
Hmm.
And I know, by no means have, and I have no answer for this, but I think we all need to think about and be reflective on what that looks like and how are we navigating that and negotiating those things both internally? Because I often internally have to be like, okay, was that a win? Did I win? Did we,
Yeah.
or is it a win? Is it a win? Or
Hmm.
is it a win at all? Or how much do I push? How much do I push this executive team, this organization, this whatever, without overwhelming folks? And how much do I not push? What is the sort of I have
Yeah.
not found the balance, but I think it is a conversation collectively as DEI folks we don't really talk about. I think we
Mhm.
all do it, and I think we all think about it, but as like a collective, we never think about okay, how do we navigate that? Because
Yeah.
I've
Yeah.
been reflecting on my consulting experience and thinking about okay, so there's this capitalistic like I need money, like we need money from you,
Yeah.
and how much do I push when I still need this sort of like capitalistic reward, right? I need
Hmm.
to have my lights and my gas on. But
Yeah.
also, like one of my former clients is a very large online retailer, and knowing that they have some very inequitable business and employee practices, and how do you the thing for me is I was working for a company, and so it's I have to go with whatever the company is sort of saying
Hmm.
is our practice. But it's like when you're in the space, if I've got the ear of the one a very large online retailer, do you just go for it? You know,
Yeah. Do you
I
just
think
go for it? Do you just go for it? And I've thought of that too. And I feel like it calls for some communities of practice for us to get together more and share some of our ups and downs and the things that we found to be successful. It's sometimes even having those situations and it's okay. And a part of this work is supporting the organizations and moving them closer to making sure that their equity goals match with their actions and the values that they state, like what they say is actually being felt and experienced by not only the people that they say that they're serving, their customers, the community they want to serve, show up for, but then also the people who are inside of their organizations and make it all run, like making that more consistent. Sometimes the work is about that. I feel like sometimes the work's also supporting those folks who marginalized identities within the organizations, trying to get the work done. It's like
mhm,
your practices, the practices of this larger organization isn't where it needs to be right now. And how can we support you as people trying to do the work within it? And then,
mhm,
and this is just me, and then sometimes I feel like it's about through the assessments, through the interviews, the focus groups, the data analysis, and sharing all those things and getting the response back from leadership. Sometimes the work can be about All right. So we've honored what it is that you all have shared with us. And so sometimes it can be about giving the folks who are within the org all the info they need to know whether or not they want to keep going or make other plans for how they want to spend their time. But
Yeah.
when you said that,
But
though, it
it's
made me think about
nuance, right?
it's nuance. It's nuance.
It's so
Mm.
nuanced.
It's nuance and it's not easy. And like you say, we still live in capitalism and it's designed in such that it makes making ethical decisions very hard for everybody. Somebody even made comment when we were on a different storytelling session around, hey, even the computer I'm using, if you look deep enough, like you can find the ways that capitalism and exploitation shows up. I appreciate your sharing because for me, it brings up, it's just a need. We need to actually spend more time. Like you said, we're doing it in terms of making the decisions in our own different spaces and when we're working with folks, but we need to
Mhm.
get together more and talk about it with each other because we may be able to help one another negotiate that a little bit better. You
Exactly.
know?
I think that goes back to our dialogue background. The different perspective always helps me inform my negotiating of, okay, are we on the right track? Is this sort of, am I pushing you far enough? Because there are ways that when you're writing up the report or writing up the focus groups that I could definitely emphasize these things or be like,
Yeah.
you need to do this. And or is that too much? Is it like, okay, maybe I need to like dial this back a little bit?
I'll always go back to the lesson that you're sharing here too. You described traveling and how that opened up your perspective in many ways.
Mhm.
But even in that experience, the idea of just getting, like you said, getting those other experiences, multiple experiences in to open up our perspective, even to let us know in the difficult moments, it's like, what are the wins? What are we doing that's
Mhm.
moving? Because I see it as like a historical thing. Like we're part of a long line of folks who have lived and moved it in the ways that they could. And here we are trying to do it for other folks. And so I love that idea. Yeah, we need to get together and talk about this more. That specific
I
thing,
mean,
like that new one. Hmm.
that's a podcast episode, Rolando. This is
I think
season
so.
2. Courtney comes back. We have a whole round table. Let's do it.
I think so. I think so. I might put it under the educational segment where it's you and we get a panel of folks together and we all just sit and we talk. It's certainly room and space on this platform to do that. So I might,
Double back. I'm ready because
yeah,
it is so interesting. It's somewhat, I don't know if you feel this way. The consulting space is somewhat individualistic, right? Like it's
yeah,
you or like your firm or whatever working with the client. So there's very little like us talking
yeah,
collectively, at least
yeah.
as far as I've seen thus
Hmm.
far. I mean, you might run into each other at a conference or something and be like, what are you, how's that going? But it's also a part of that is capitalistic, right? Because you're always
Yep.
trying to find the next, I'm trying to get clients. I'm trying to keep the lights on. But I think in the DEI space, the collectivist idea of us sharing knowledge, I think would be a beautiful thing. Yeah.
I agree. I agree. And we need to, that's another one. So yeah, we get some folks together to talk and then we'll get you and some other folks together to talk about the ways DEI itself has been used and being co-opted into a pejorative term for folks too. And let's unpack that for a minute.
Ooh,
You know what I mean? So we go,
ooh,
yeah,
ooh,
yeah. So
ooh.
we'll get some folks together and talk about that. Cause it's just say what you really want to say. Just say it. But
Oh,
definitely.
or our DEI candidate.
Mhm. Mhm.
Our DEI candidate. Okay.
Yeah, let's talk about this. Let's think about this a little bit deeper and see. And then sometimes, honestly, stuff like that. Then that early undergrad, that college Rolando comes out. Wait a minute. Yeah, I still remember these books when affirmative action was white. Start throwing stuff out there. I have 3 finish the statement prompts, and I'll read. And it's really just a snapshot of what you're thinking in the moment. Your answers to this may change given time and stuff, but just read the statement, and then you just say what comes to mind.
Okay.
Okay, finish the statement. True social justice is possible when.
True social justice is possible when we center our collective good, when we are open to meaningful feedback. So feedback that is coming from a place of growth and love. When we recognize our interconnectedness, right? I think one of the beautiful things of the union experience and being with my dad is like recognizing that we are better when we are all collectively working together and we know that we are all connected in this way. And so social justice happens when we don't see each other as others and as an us or an all, and then we can then move forward in a stronger way, in a more there's more of us. When I'm not seeing you as you're over there and I'm over here, but we are all sort of one thing and moving um, towards progress.
Okay. My approach to social justice is shaped by.
My approach to social justice is shaped by my best friend in my head, Bell Hooks, rest in peace. Her theories about love and teaching and growing. If you've never read Teaching to Transgress, are all about love. It is truly like, how do you create social justice practice based on love? And then how do you educate folks so that they can be awakened themselves, right? And to think critically for themselves. My social justice practice is definitely informed by my intergroup dialogue training and being a facilitator and continuing to do that work. My social justice practice is inspired and uplifted by my ancestors and recognizing that I know a lot of folks can't, but I can trace at least my dad's side of lineage back to American chattel slavery. And I know like where they were and plantation and all those things. And so recognizing that I know that's where I come from and the work and sacrifices people have made for me to be here is a recognition and a motivator. Like I got work to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I got work
Got work to
to
do.
do.
That's
Got
real.
work to do. Yeah, and inspired by writers, Alice Walker, Hughes. I create young people, Black creativity, all of those things. It's informed and inspired by art, music, and just a real sort of internal wanting better for people, for the world. For my, I talked about earlier, my nephew is 2, and I'm
Yeah.
obsessed with this kid. And I want
Mm,
him to have the best life and to
mhm.
have all the opportunities and all of the things. And I want to create space so that folks can do that, so that he can do that. So then we all can live and exist and not police ourselves and others, and that we can be free.
Understanding and sharing our social justice origin stories is important because.
Because at least in our current political context in mid to late summer 2024, social justice and DEI is personified and villainized is the word I'm
Mm.
going to use in a certain way. And our stories need to be shared to humanize our experiences, those of us who do the work for the greater good to make
Mhm.
something better.
Yeah.
We are real people interested in the collective good of folks. Sharing our social justice stories are important because the DEI work and social justice work as it exists now is very new. And a lot of folks are navigating this space without mentorship, without um, narratives, without support, and are often as we talked about, the only person
Yeah.
in the organization who's like working to do this work and to allow folks to know that they're one, not alone, two, other people have navigated the space and that there's a collective and community that exists. And sharing our social justice stories are important because sharing story is important. It is both our legacy, right? So this oral tradition of sharing story, sharing lived experience is important in telling our perspective of existence, right? So we can think about enslaved folks who taught themselves to read so that they could read the Bible. We can think about early African American authors writing stories about what it was like to live in Harlem in the 1920s, what it was. Lorraine Hansberry who wrote about, what it was like to live in Chicago in the 50s and 60s and to try to buy a house, to share like the real lived experience of people who are doing this work, and sharing those narratives is a part of a greater ancestry, and important that all of those folks before us who share their stories, they wanted to share that we existed, that these people, that the narratives that were said about them were not necessarily true and more nuanced than that. And that generations from now, people will be like, oh, so those are the folks who were doing this. This is why this
That's right.
policy exists. This is why, oh, we have 1 year maternity leave. I don't know what make happen. Then they're like, oh, okay, this was, I don't know what they're going to call our era, like historical era, but whatever, if we're the post civil rights part two, whatever our sort of era's nickname will be, I don't know, that we were the people here, and that this is the truth, like of our
Mhm.
experience.
Mm-hmm. We were here.
We were here.
That's right. That's right. And when you mentioned the next generation or generations from now, that's actually our final question here. So I'm hoping that this storytelling, your story, the collective stories that are a part of this project will remain for many years to come. And so if for future generations who would come across these recording or this recording with you and I right now, what would you like to share with them? What would you like to pass on to them? What would you want them to know?
I want them to know that those of us who are doing this work right now are thinking about them, and the world already exists the way it exists in our life. But I am always thinking about how their lives are going to be and how we can make the healthcare system, the workforce better for them. I would hope, or I would empower them to, unfortunately, I think there's always going to be someone at the margins, at least pedagogy of the oppressed. That's at least one of the like assertions that is made. And so if that is the case in your time or in the future, that we are continuing to bring that underclass or that oppressed folks narrative forward and trying to eliminate that, right? So that experience doesn't exist. And then I would say continue. Hopefully, maybe you don't have to fight the good fight, but if you do, continue to fight the good fight. I think those of us who work in the social justice space, it is both emotionally exhaustive, sometimes physically exhausted,
Mm.
but also like inherently rewarding to see when the wins come, the wins feel great. And to continue to educate yourself, do the work, and feel this sort of excitement and thrill of getting to, wow, I got through to this, even if it's a dialogue, I got through to this one person and I saw that light bulb open. So continuing to do this work and fight the good fight, because I do believe it's worth it. I think the long days, even the days where you're like, okay, I'm just going to go lay down now. I'm
It's
not
worth
going to
it.
go, I'm not talking to anybody else for the rest of the day, but I think it ends up being worth it.
It's worth it. Thank you. That's Courtney Holland, everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. No, thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review on Apple Podcasts and subscribe to Social Justice Origin Stories there or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also watch video episodes on YouTube at Social Justice Origin Stories, and I'd really appreciate it if you subscribe there as well. Video episodes are also available on the project website, socialjusticeoriginstories.com. Follow the project on Instagram at Social Justice Origin Stories. I'd love to hear about how you're engaging with the stories. Share your thoughts at socialjusticeoriginstories.com/contact or by emailing stories@socialjusticeoriginstories.com. To support the work of Social Justice Origin Stories, consider becoming a monthly patron. Your contributions will help keep this research going and support its mission. Visit patreon.com/socialjusticeoriginstories to learn more and make a contribution. Again, That's patreon.com/social justice origin stories. You can start or stop anytime. Social Justice Origin Stories is edited, hosted, and produced by me, Rolando Tompkins Jones. Many thanks to our storyteller this week and the many storytellers who have contributed to this project. And thank you for joining me this week. Take care.